And the very thought of it is so arrogant, and future historians will say this is unbelievable. What were these guys thinking?
And then you look at what actually happens, and basically it's just a bunch of words. Basically, it's amounted to a whole lot of nothing. Just quickly, some introductory remarks. So I've seen some videos from Kishore Mahbubani before. He generally strikes me as very smart. A lot of his analysis seems to be accurate. I do think, though, he's probably a little bit biased in favor of China, which is expected. He is a Singaporean diplomat, which is not the same thing as being from China, but it's clearly like relative to America. Like would you expect someone that was a Singapore diplomat to have more of a pro-Chinese bias or more of a pro-American bias? I would expect all is equal to for that diplomat to have a pro-Chinese bias. So I have noticed stuff. Good boy. So I have noticed stuff like that in the past. I forget exactly, like we went over before, but I'm forgetting exact details on the examples right now. But I remember there being times when it seemed like there was probably a bit of a pro-Chinese bias. Maybe like one specific example coming to mind, like when COVID was first breaking out. I think if I remember correctly, there was a video with Mahbubani saying that the Chinese were being very forthcoming with the data and letting an international investigative group look into what happened with COVID. And I think, again, like I'd have to look into the details further to be sure about this, but it seems very likely to me that that's an extremely charitable, like overly charitable view of what happened, and overly charitable towards the Chinese there. Like it seems extremely likely to me that the Chinese government was actually very reticent about releasing data, and they were like very controlling of what kind of investigation was able to take place or not, right? So that's an example, if I remember correctly. I think I am. So anyway, maybe probably some pro-Chinese bias here from Mahbubani, but that's okay. We can just try to keep that in mind when listening to his analysis.
In the run up to the Iraq War, we need to revisit that because I want to talk mainly today about China.
They don't seem to understand that the very idea that a 250-year-old upstart in world history could convert a 4,000-year-old civilization with 4 times the population and convert it to become a replica of the United States of America. And the very thought of it is so arrogant, and future historians will say this is unbelievable. What were these guys thinking? So what you're seeing today in China is a very...
Do you see what I mean about the likely pro-Chinese bias? This wasn't like a hard example of that, but I think it was a kind of soft example of that. Like why use the framing of 4,000-year-old civilization versus a 250-year-old country? Like this is not super relevant, with like who's going to control like the sea in Asia, or nuclear bombs, like modern economics. Like this is just not really, like what happened 4,000 years ago is completely irrelevant. Anyway.
Unbelievable. What were these guys thinking? So what you're seeing today in China is a very natural return of a civilization which over 4,000 years goes for 200 years, it goes down. And it has gone down for 150 years. And then it's coming up for another 200 years now. And it's just beginning to come out. And the idea that this civilization, when it wakes up, is going to forget its 4,000-year-old history and say, hey, I want to be like America. Mm-hmm. Now, that's an absolutely stupid assumption that completely fogs American thinking on China. Because at the end of the day, one thing that Asians who live in Asia know, that this is an old civilization. It will remain Chinese civilization. It will behave like Chinese civilization, and we can get along with it. Okay. But it will not become...
Here's another kind of counterpoint to the entire framing that he's using here. Communism, right? So, Mao's China, and even, the CCP is still in power today, although it obviously, like, they've reformed a lot, most specifically with the actual economic system that they use. It's complicated, right? Because they still use a lot of a kind of state capitalism, right? Like where there's a lot of state involvement in a lot of the big companies. But clearly there's been a huge shift in the economic system. But anyway, sorry. The point is that he keeps bringing up this 4,000-year-old civilization as if they've been one coherent civilization for that entire time, and maybe he has a point there. But I think the whole communist revolution thing and like that whole thing, which obviously in a 4,000 year old timeline, this is much more recent in the past like 100 years or so. That shows that actually China is capable of dramatic changes. And it's not like, just because it was like this for 4,000 years, it's going to be like that forever. Because again, communism. I think that actually is a pretty good point. But of course I would say that because I said it.
Chinese civilization. It will behave like Chinese civilization.
I don't think they want to invade Taiwan. And I've wondered whether the amount of rhetorical attention the United States pays to Taiwan, increases the chances of war. Makes it harder, just arouses various forces that could cause trouble. Is that your view, that the less America talks about it, the less likely war will be?
Well, the one lesson of geopolitics is that when great powers raise human rights issues, it is only brought up when it is a convenient geopolitical weapon. So in 1971...
I kind of hate that he talks like that. Like, can you just answer the question, please? Bob asked you a very direct question. Like, do you think it's actually better for the U.S. to not bring up Taiwan if we want to avoid war? Which I think is a very clear question and a good one, and probably the answer is yes, but it would be nice to actually hear him respond to that instead of give us a lesson about something. Like, these fucking politicians or whatever.
Lesson of geopolitics is that when...
How do they perceive that? Is it that they just frame the whole issue otherwise, or they think we don't understand why they've resorted to what they're doing, or do they think we're exaggerating what they're doing, or what? Do you have any sense for what the Chinese perception of the Uyghur situation is?
Well, the Chinese perception of the Uyghur situation is that the United States, when it was attacked after 9/11, decided to respond partly as an act of revenge, partly as an act of deterrence by invading Afghanistan and then invading Iraq, right? And it was seen as retaliation against the 9/11 attack. The Chinese were subject to similar attacks from Uyghur separatists and so on and so forth. So when I was in Shanghai, I was told China also had its 9/11 moment. And that's when China decided to say, this will stop. This won't happen. And what's interesting is that the Americans say that the...
Okay, that's very interesting. I literally never heard that angle before for the Uyghur situation. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. Again, I haven't looked into it in depth, and I've never heard about this before. But he could. I assume he's not lying about this. So very interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I guess we have to leave it at that before because I'd have to look into it more to be sure about the veracity of the claims, right? But very interesting. If it actually is true, I mean, it certainly shifts the framing of the entire issue. So that's interesting.
And what I find very puzzling is that the United States has got the world's best universities, the world's best think tanks, the world's best newspapers, but it doesn't listen to...
Okay, poker thing. So sometimes Snowy, after it checks back on the flop, check on the flop, it likes 2x potting on the turn. I don't know exactly when to do that. It's probably just in general when you have a shit ton of equity, either a very strong draw or a very strong value hand, and then it makes sense in that sort of situation to bet big. And this is one of those spots. We have top pair and a flush draw, which is quite strong, especially against the check back range. So I think I'm going to go for 2x pot and see what happens. Hey. Okay, Snowy thought that was correct, though. So that's good.
And I want to tell you, just to emphasize why this is so important to me. When I grew up in Singapore, now Singapore is very wealthy. The per capita income of Singapore was $500. When I went to school at the age of 6, I was put on a special feeding program because I was technically undernourished because I came from a poor family in a poor Singapore. And, we didn't have a flush toilet. We had gangsters killing each other on our doorstep. So
Okay, that's fucking crazy. Actually, I want to listen to that again. That's That's a really incredible change in one lifetime.
Eradicated poverty. 0. And that's one of the most incredible, impressive achievements in human history.
Decline, and therefore, as Clinton said, it would be in America's interest to establish a world in which laws are respected, and you don't have to worry about being invaded if you're not the most powerful country in the world. I think you and I agree on that, and I think it's really one of the great tragedies of American foreign policy that either there wasn't enough vision to kind of implement that policy, or beginning at the end of the Cold War, or there was too much political fear to fear of the political consequences to pursue the vision.
One person.
So this is a tough one. I think in all likelihood, yeah, it would have been smart, it would have, like like perhaps with more vision or a more perspective view, uh, the American leaders would have been able to realize that yes, eventually, in all likelihood, especially given the population dynamic, that a country like China or somebody, probably China, would eventually supersede the U.S. as a economic power, and so with that in mind, probably it makes sense to write the rules of the road so that you don't have to be the big boss. Like it's not like yeah, as I think Bob has said before, if make it so that we're no longer in a jungle, so we're no longer like abiding by the rules of the jungle, right? Like something like this. So I think ideally that would have been done, and that would also have worked. Unfortunately, we don't live in an ideal world, so the first part did not happen. Of course, it didn't actually occur. And then the second thing is, even if it did occur, I'm not sure if it would have actually worked, because I still, in general, take I think the general realist view, the general view that Mearsheimer trots out. Although, as far as I understand it, this is just the broad realist view. It's not just Mearsheimer who thinks this. Is that there's a general state of anarchy in the international order, and because of this, if you just like agree on paper that you're going to abide by international law, essentially great powers aren't actually going to abide by those rules when it no longer suits their interests. And this apparently is what we see with America. This is what we see with China now. More recently, I mean, even Mahbubani said himself, if in this conversation, if I remember correctly, that generally speaking, great powers only abide by international law when it suits them.
And China is not going to respect it. But as you know, most great powers violate international law some of the time, not all the time. And as you know, the United States has a base in Diego Garcia, which the ICJ has declared that the British ownership of the base is illegal and it should be returned to Mauritius. And neither the United States nor UK are going to abide by the World Court ruling. It's not surprising. That's how great powers behave.
Right. So if that's the case, if that general realist view is correct, and like great powers essentially are just going to go with their own self-interest, then it didn't really matter. It wouldn't have really mattered if the U.S. Strongly advanced the norm of abiding by international law, because basically other great powers wouldn't have listened. Like it would just, like, maybe it would have influenced things on the margin slightly, but it probably wouldn't have influenced things greatly, because again, you come back to the realist logic of these great powers are just going to do whatever they think is best for themselves, basically. Norms be damned. And I think that, again, it comes down to the crux of the problem when it comes to the international system. There's no teeth. There's no mechanism. There's no enforcement mechanism. We've talked about this in the past a bit. So you look at something like the UN, and it's just like it sounds nice. It looks good on paper. It looks real fancy with all of, like, the diplomats or whatever from all of the different countries in the world. And like, wow, we're a global community, amazing. And then you look at what actually happens, and basically it's just a bunch of words. There's no incentive structure. There's no real incentive structure. There's no real enforcement mechanism whatsoever. And so basically, it's amounted to a whole lot of nothing, as far as I can tell. Or like it rounds to nothing. Maybe it accomplishes some things here and there, but essentially it rounds to nothing. So as far as I can tell, in our current situation, that's just that's like the peak of what is possible with international law and in international bodies. Like, perhaps we can figure something out so that there's some sort of incentive mechanism or some sort of enforcement mechanism, so that you actually have a kind of Leviathan at the international level. That like then we're at least talking, we're at least having a conversation about something that could actually work. But if it's anything like how it's constructed today, as far as I can tell, that means that it's not going to work. Trying to implement international law in a strong way, trying to use international institutions in a strong way to actually enforce behavior or enforce laws and make sure that behavior abides by those laws. This just is not tenable. And as far as I can tell, that's regardless of whether or not the U.S. did a good job of abiding by international law for the past couple of decades. So, yeah, I don't know. Interesting topic, though, and hard to say with certainty. But it seems likely to me that you need a shift. You need some sort of paradigm shift where I don't know how this would be done, but you need some sort of enforcement mechanism at the international level, or else you have nothing. It really doesn't matter what the U.S. does.
to be absolutely amazed by the dynamism of the entrepreneurs there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a bustling, thriving, modern cities that are in some ways more dynamic than many American cities today.
Yeah.
Right? And so at the end of the day, the United States should worry about the fact that it is generating a plutocracy at home when China is generating a meritocracy. And the real contest is not going to be about how big your navies are. It's going to be which society.
That was a strong statement. Okay, I don't have much to say, but it's a very interesting point. And there might be some truth to it. It's hard to tell, because we're going, clearly there's a lot of income inequality and wealth inequality in America. But then, our answer to this, or at least one of the answers to this, things like affirmative action, things like woke politics or whatever, like identity politics, whatever word you want to use for it. Okay, let's fix income and wealth inequality by reverse racism. That seems like a good, okay, anyway. You know my spiel on this, or I don't know if you know, but my normal thinking where basically I think wokeism is stupid. But on the other hand, when you look at the Chinese system, I mean they're certainly not woke, so that's something, I guess. And yeah, from a meritocracy standpoint, it does seem like generally speaking there is a lot more meritocracy in the Chinese system than in America. Net, it gets complicated, right? There's probably a significant amount of corruption in the CCP and in the entire bureaucracy. That's my sense anyway. Again, it's hard to know exactly what's going on the ground there, but it seems like probably there's a significant amount of corruption depending on the province or whatever. But in order to get into the colleges, in order to get into the fancy jobs or whatever, even to get into the CCP, my understanding is you just take a test and they just go by the test. So basically, it's all standardized testing, at least for entrance, getting your foot into the door, or getting for the entrance, right? So that's interesting, and basically the opposite direction that America seems to be going in today. So yeah, again, hard to say exactly what's going on in China, especially, but I will say that Mahbubani at least has a point here. Unfortunately, it makes me a little, it hurts me to say this, but yeah.
Than many American cities today. The United States is the only major developed country where the bottom 50% has not seen an improvement for 3 decades or so. That's where the real contest is.
Yeah, and that's what you would have us, that's what you would encourage us to focus on, becoming an exemplary society, the society we were once thought of as being.
You can be again. You can be.
I hope. From where I sit, it seems like there are a lot of challenges, but I agree that.
I think that's a very interesting point. And I don't know. I haven't thought about this deeply before, but there's a lot about the Cold War that I don't know, and I'd like to learn more. I need to learn more. But it does seem like his general point about how the Cold War was won is basically correct, because I mean it was a Cold War, right? There was no hot direct war. That's kind of like the thing about the Cold War. So how did the U.S. win that war? As far as I can tell, he's basically right about how it was won. It was basically like the societal vitality of the U.S. was greater than the societal vitality of the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union basically collapsed under its own weight because its economic system sucked. Its political system sucked. The people were unhappy, etc. Right. So, so that seems basically right. So that's pretty interesting. For how the Cold War was decided, and then maybe perhaps it will also come into play today with as Ferguson says in Cold War II. Whether or not we're actually in a Cold War now, I don't know. Whatever, I don't really care. It's kind of like just nomenclature. I don't give a fuck about nomenclature, generally speaking. But it could be that actually the most important piece of it is not the ships that we build or whatever, anything like that. It's actually the society that we can create at home. I mean, it's possible. Of course, all of that goes to shit if we actually get into a hot war. Then then your aircraft carriers matter, then your drones matter, then your bombs matter, etc. Right? So hopefully it doesn't come to that, obviously. But yeah, interesting point here actually from Mahbubani. Fuck, I fucked it up.
Was exacerbated by COVID, which he used to political advantage. And I've got to say, I don't think
China, the China virus.